Have you ever gotten into an argument with someone about what a book really meant, or a movie, or even just a simple text message? It's funny, we often think the meaning is totally obvious, but how we read things is actually, well, it's a minefield. Today, we're going to dig into why that happens, and more importantly, how we can all get a little bit better at it.
So this is the big question, right? How can one single story, something that seems so simple on the surface, end up with a dozen completely different interpretations? To get to the bottom of this, let's look at a story you probably already know.
The Good Samaritan. We all know this one. A guy gets beaten up, the supposedly good guys, the priest and the Levite, walk right by. And who stops to help? The Samaritan, the person who was considered an enemy. The moral seems crystal clear. Be kind, even to people you're not supposed to like. Simple, right? Well, maybe not.
Now, get a load of this. An early Christian scholar named Jerome looked at that simple story and saw something completely different. All of a sudden, the man isn't just a man, he's a Christian. The robbers, oh, that's the devil. The Samaritan is actually Jesus, and the donkey he's riding represents salvation. Even the two coins have this massive symbolic meaning. This is a huge leap from just be a good neighbor. So, how on earth did we get from there to here?
To figure out how a straightforward story gets so tangled, we've got to look at the common mistakes we make when we read. Our source calls these traps, which I think is a perfect word. We're going to walk through 4 of the biggest ones, and then wrap up with 3 key ideas that can help us all read a little more carefully.
All right, our first culprit is the allegory trap. This is exactly what we just saw with the Good Samaritan. It's that temptation to see every little detail as a secret symbol for something else, whether it was meant to be or not.
So what is allegory? It's basically when one thing stands in for another bigger idea. And look, it can be an amazing tool when an author wants to use it. The real trouble starts when we, the readers, start inventing our own hidden meanings that the writer never even dreamed of.
Here's a perfect example of this in action. A preacher might claim that the 5 stones David picked up to fight Goliath each represent a spiritual quality, like righteousness, joy, peace. You get the idea. It sounds really deep, but the source asks some pretty simple questions. Like if all 5 qualities were so important, why did he only need 1 stone to win? And, maybe more to the point, where in the text does it say the stones mean any of that? The answer is, it doesn't.
And I love this quote because it just shows how direct the source is. Someone had a theory that a scarlet cord mentioned in the story of Rahab was a symbol for the blood of Christ. The critique? Nonsense. It was a scarlet cord because scarlet is a bright color and it's easy to see. Sometimes the simplest explanation really is the right one.
Okay, so that's the allegory trap, finding meanings that just aren't there. But what about when we try to use a text to answer questions it was never, ever meant to address? Well, that leads us right into our second major pitfall, the irrelevance trap.
The irrelevance trap is all about trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It's like opening a cookbook to find out how to fix your car, or reading an ancient religious text to justify a modern political agenda. You're asking the text to do a job it was never built for.
And this isn't just an academic mistake. It can have absolutely devastating consequences. For centuries, a story from Genesis known as the Curse of Ham was twisted to justify slavery and apartheid. The claim was that it proved the inferiority of black nations. But if you actually look at the text, as the source points out, it has nothing to do with race at all. It was a prophecy about a power struggle between 2 specific ancient peoples, the Israelites and the Canaanites.
This quote just hits so hard because it captures the real-world fallout of this trap. It speaks to that feeling of exploitation when a sacred text is used as a tool to gain power or take land. It's a stark reminder that how we interpret things isn't just a game. It has a profound, real-world impact on people's lives.
So we've seen how looking for hidden meanings or irrelevant answers can get us into trouble. Our third trap is a little more personal. It's called the impression trap, and it's what happens when we basically stop listening to the text and start listening only to our own thoughts.
The source calls this one a shortcut, and that's exactly what it is. You know, you read something, an idea pops into your head, and you think, yep, that's it. That's the meaning. We end up projecting our own opinions and biases onto the page without ever stopping to ask, wait, what did the person who wrote this actually intend?
Here's a fantastic example. A preacher had a bone to pick and decided Moses was a male chauvinist because he told a group of daughters they had to marry within their own tribe. But that impression totally ignores what the text itself says. First, it wasn't even Moses' idea. the text says it was a command from God. And second, there was a very clear, practical reason for it, to make sure inherited land stayed within the tribe, which was a huge deal for their society.
Now, when our personal impressions get set in stone and become deeply held beliefs, we can fall into what might be the most insidious trap of all. This is the dogma trap. It's where we twist a text to make it agree with what we already believe. So, instead of actually listening to what a text is trying to say, we essentially put our hands over its mouth. We only hear the echo of our own ideas. And the danger here is that the text can never challenge us or teach us anything new, because we've already decided what it's allowed to say before we even start reading.
And look, this isn't just something that beginners do. We're talking about Martin Luther, one of the most important figures in the Protestant Reformation. His entire theology was built on the idea of justification by faith alone. So when he got to the book of James in the Bible, which says pretty clearly that faith without works is dead, he couldn't make it fit. So what did he do? He dismissed the entire book as an epistle of straw. His dogma was so powerful, it forced him to reject a piece of the text that disagreed with him.
And here's a more modern take. A pastor preaches that wives must obey their husbands. But the source points out a couple of huge problems. First, the original Greek word is closer to submit, and it comes right after a verse calling for mutual submission between everyone. And second, he conveniently forgets to mention the very next line, which commands husbands to love their wives sacrificially. He's literally cherry-picking words and ignoring context to prop up his own beliefs.
Okay, so we've worked our way through the 4 big traps: allegory, irrelevance, impression, and dogma. It can feel like a bit of a minefield, I get it. But the good news is, it's not hopeless. Our source gives us a simple, powerful toolkit. 3 keys that can help us read with a lot more accuracy and, frankly, a lot more humility. This is really the whole thing in a nutshell. First, you've got to try and understand what the original writer was trying to say. That means doing a little homework on their world and their context. Second, you have to know the purpose of the text. You just can't read a poem the same way you read a legal contract. And third, and this is the really hard one, you have to be willing to let the text challenge you. You have to be open to the idea that it might change your mind instead of the other way around.
When you boil it all down, it really just comes to this. Good reading, careful interpretation, it isn't about being the smartest person in the room or proving you're right. It's an act of listening. It's about being quiet enough to hear a voice that isn't your own, whether that voice is from yesterday or from 2,000 years ago.
And so that kind of leaves us with one last thought. We've been talking a lot about ancient texts, but these traps pop up everywhere, in news articles, in work emails, in legal documents. So my question for you is this: what's one thing in your life that might deserve a second, more careful, and more humble read?